Hello everyone, nobody here. I'm in the mood for some jolly cooperation. I call this one Sunbro, since technically it can be considered a support build. It revolves around Phoenix Cradle, a legs exotic based around sunspots that really deserves more attention. There are two main effects hidden in these snazzy legs. Number 1, sunspot benefits go from 5 to 10 seconds, and number 2, sunspots you make count for your allies. But we don't really care about the allies part. When someone touches a Phoenix Cradle Titan sunspot, they get restoration for 6 seconds and greatly increased ability regen for 10 seconds. That's every time they touch one, and we'll be making plenty. Since the focus is sunspots, let's start with the subclass configuration. From left to right, for supers, use your preference. For melees, either works, but I know throwing hammer is the golden child right now, and it's excellent at making sunspots in a pinch. For grenades, I actually recommend Firebolt. It has a very fast cooldown, a wide radius, and incredible tracking in exchange for relatively low damage. That's fine since your grenade doesn't actually have to get kills in order to trigger sunspots. They just need to spread Scorch. Because if you look over at your aspects, the first one we're using is Soul Invictus. Getting an ability kill, killing a Scorch target, or throwing a hammer in super all make sunspots. The key is that it doesn't matter how you scorch a target before it dies. So long as it's burning when you kill it, that target will make a nice cozy fire tornado for you and your friends. Sunspots themselves spread Scorch too, which leads to more sunspots and even sometimes ignitions. This aspect and Phoenix Cradle are the core of the build. For aspect number 2, Consecration is fine, but Roaring Flames is definitely the better option. Soul Invictus lasting 10 seconds is the reason. You will likely entirely recharge your abilities quickly thanks to sunspots. Since your abilities loop either from retrieving a thrown hammer or soaking in the sun, you can build Roaring Flames very easily. And once you have full stacks, Firebolt grenades actually hit very hard in addition to the natural Scorch effect, keeping this loop active even in difficult content regardless of whether they actually pick up the kills. Moving on to your fragments, they actually don't matter much, but I do recommend using torches for radiant buffs, Soulless to make restoration and radiant last longer, and ashes to ignite tougher enemies who can stand in the sunspots a little bit longer. In the last slot, I often find myself swapping between Benevolence and Searing. Benevolence has no use when solo, so watch out for that. I also gave Empyrean a shot, but kills only seemed to extend the timer by about 2 seconds each, so it didn't really feel like it was worth the negative 10 resilience. Of course, all of this matters very little if we can't make sunspots in the first place, so let's remember why they happen. Option 1, you get a kill with an ability. Option 2, you use your super. Option 3, you scorch something and then kill it while it's burning. All of these were reliant on ability kills in some form until recently. This season, alongside Solar 3.0, we also got introduced to a perk called Incandescent, which spreads Scorch on kill, similar to something like Dragonfly having an explosion on kill. Since it scorches targets, this actually counts for sunspots, and it's the difference between 1 or 2 sunspots a minute versus a sunspot every 5 to 10 seconds. Even though the perk is new, there are already a couple of good options in the energy slot that can roll with it. Drang Baroque and Callous Mini Tool are both craftable and are top tier choices. Strident Whistle, the Vanguard Bow, is a decent pickup for future seasons where we have bow champion mods. If you want to use a kinetic or stasis primary, then the craftable Shotgun Without Remorse can also have Incandescent. Or you could use Jotun with its Catalyst, but that will burn your exotic slot, and I think there are better choices. Similarly, I don't recommend using heavies with Incandescent, but Fixed Odds from the Duality dungeon does a decent job spreading Scorch. It's craftable after 5 red box drops. Of course, Incandescent isn't a necessary requirement, so unless you're rocking Font of Might, your weapon options are completely open. Incandescent is just a really nice synergy. You'll be killing enemies either way, so making sunspots in the middle of groups is excellent. On that note, one of the main strengths of this build is that you don't need to change your playstyle much to get everything out of it. Just remember to tag your sunspots every once in a while. And again, enemies that enter sunspots also get scorched, so as long as you get one going, you might be able to make quite a few, especially if you put one down at a choke point. You don't need to use an ability to kill enemies, but you do need to get the kill on a scorched enemy to make one. Another strength of this build is that you don't need any of the combat style mods to be competitive and get work done. You also don't have to force yourself into a support role either. All of the benefits to other players are just nice bonuses that come from Phoenix Cradle, and they apply to you even if you don't buff anyone else, unlike something like, say, Lumina. If you do want to build that way though, you're certainly no slouch at it. You'll basically always have a melee in order to proc Radiant and make Sunspots so long as you aren't whiffing, which will fill the support and add clear rolls nicely. And thanks to Roaring Flames, you don't have to worry about giving someone else the kills in order to make their build work. Yours works just fine. This build is great in solo activities thanks to all of the healing and ability loops. Speaking of setups, let's move on to mods. Flexibility is one of the main draws for this build, but you'll still want to focus on resilience and damage resist mods. Tier 10 resilience is optimal since you'll want to be able to use restoration to heal through any damage you take. Otherwise, you can invest in whatever you like stat-wise. You won't have to worry too much about your ability cooldowns, so the points can go wherever you want. I do like to have at least one Siphon mod though, since orbs tend to drop near sunspots, and I'll be grabbing those at the same time as my buffs. Assuming you do have combat mods though, you can really take this build to the next level. There are 3 main viable modes to consider: Wellmaker mode, Charge with Light mode, and a hybrid. The first is a support setup I put together based on the Wellmaker mods and Bountiful Wells. I have on here Seeking Wells in order to make them track to allies, and then one each of Melee Wellmaker, Elemental Ordnance, and Elemental Armaments. Finally, I have Bountiful Wells in order to double the amount of well drops. Altogether, this means that things I would be doing anyway, make wells that regen ability energy and send them toward allies for just a bit of incidental support. But between me and you, I don't really care about those bozos all that much. I'm busy tending the fireplace over here. With this setup, you'll basically be able to throw out any ability you feel like at any time, thanks to all of the Sunspot regen on top of the Elemental Well regen. That means you'll always have Sunspot opportunities on deck. You'll find that you don't need to bother with Well of Life, since the natural Sunspot restoration is enough already. But if you're truly worried about survivability, I think I would replace Elemental Ordnance with it, just to be safe. Next up would be the Charge with Light mode. This one is more focused on ad clear. You'll want to run the corresponding Charge with Light mod type for your incandescent weapon. For instance, the Arc Swift Charge mod for Callous Mini Tool or Drank Baroque, or the Kinetic Siphon and Taking Charge mods for kinetic slot weapons using No Remorse. Then use High Energy Fire or Surprise Attack for passive damage bonuses to all targets. This is useful in content around Legend or Raid difficulty where targets are a little beefier, and you really need to get those first 2 kills to start the Sunspot train. Even with that, you'll still have a couple of combat mod slots open, which kind of makes that feel incomplete, doesn't it? Let's talk about the hybrid build. I recommend Melee Wellmaker, and then follow it up with Elemental Charge and either Argent Ordnance or Lucent Blade. You'll want to run it with either Gallahorn or the Lament. This setup basically saves your damage buffs for your heavy exotic. Then you can top it off with Font of Might, which stacks with both of those buffs for the big numbers. You can also add in Supercharge to stack even more Charge with Light for longer lasting damage phases. You shouldn't have much of a problem lining things up, since thanks to all of the ability regen you should always have a hammer to make a well in order to start the damage phase. But even if you don't manage to get Font of Might during the damage phase, you'll already have the other stocked buffs. And I don't think I need to remind anyone how good those exotics are, even without a damage buff. I did also give Warmind Cells a shot, but unfortunately Sunspots don't count for Wrath of Rasputin, only ignitions and certain grenades. They just aren't worth investing in right now unless we get a Warmind Cell weapon with Incandescent at some point. In conclusion, this build strikes a really beautiful balance between being a support buddy and just handling problems yourself. The real nice part is that, just like its namesake, the Sunbro build worries only about taking care of stuff, and if your allies get buffed, cool. It's just enough jolly cooperation to get past those big walls in any of those activities you're having trouble with. And the healing factor can make all of the difference in hard activities, where the enemies tend to have just enough health to get scorched by a sunspot and then run off and spread it somewhere else. This will be my go-to Titan solar configuration for a while, and I highly recommend it to everyone. Have a jolly day, and I'll see you around.